My name is Ellie. 2 months ago, my life took an unexpected turn. I had always struggled with poor vision and wore thick glasses since my childhood. Eager to finally see clearly, I decided to undergo laser eye surgery, a procedure I anticipated would be straightforward and life-changing. My parents, proud of my recent college graduation with honors and my new job at a prestigious 3D design firm, generously offered to cover the cost as a graduation present. Everything seemed normal on the day of the surgery. Accompanied by my supportive mother, I went into the operating room feeling nervous, yet hopeful. The doctors made their routine preparations, and as they administered the anesthesia, I held my mother's hand, unaware that it would be the last time I would see her face clearly. Tragically, during the surgery, a rare and unexpected complication occurred, severely damaging both of my retinas and leaving me permanently blind. Despite multiple emergency surgeries, my vision could not be restored. The doctors explained that a malfunction in the laser machine during the procedure caused severe damage, and although I had signed the consent forms that acknowledged potential risks, our options for legal recourse were limited. The aftermath was devastating. The surgery center dodged responsibility, and it was only after a prolonged struggle and the threat of media exposure that they agreed to a minimal settlement that barely covered the emergency procedures, let alone my ongoing care needs. My parents' insurance added to the ordeal, denying coverage for my rehabilitation by claiming the surgery was elective and thus, they weren't liable for the complications. Amid this financial and emotional strain, my parents have exhausted their savings and taken extreme measures to support my needs, including mortgaging our home and cashing out retirement funds. The cost of rehabilitation equipment, adaptive technology, and home modifications has been astronomical. Recently, tensions have escalated at home. My sister, who had been living independently, is planning to return home and has expressed discomfort with my presence, adding to the family's stress. My parents, who have already sacrificed so much, now face the heartbreaking consideration of asking me to move out to manage the situation. The guilt of placing such a burden on my family weighs heavily on me, compounded by the ongoing battles with insurance and the emotional toll it has taken on all of us. As we navigate this challenging time, I find myself grappling with the harsh realities of my situation and the profound changes it has brought to our lives. After making the difficult decision to have eye surgery, I hope to escape the daily inconvenience of wearing glasses. Yet, the consequences of that choice quickly became overwhelming. The initial weeks turned into a harrowing ordeal of adaptations, transforming basic activities like eating and using the restroom into daunting tasks. To accommodate my new needs, my parents transformed our living room into a makeshift bedroom to avoid the challenge of stairs. They devoted themselves to teaching me how to navigate the world anew, with a cane through Braille and by utilizing adaptive technology. My mother even paused her career to support me full-time, while my father worked additional hours to offset our escalating medical expenses. My professional aspirations took a hit when a promising job opportunity in UI/UX design, a field where I had excelled academically and secured top internships, slipped away. A terse email informed me that my visual impairment disqualified me from the role's requirements. The $97,000 starting salary that was to be my ticket to financial independence and a means to alleviate my parents' financial burden vanished overnight. Consequently, I found myself embroiled in the daunting process of applying for disability benefits, a journey marked by complexity and indignity, taking half a year and multiple rejections before any aid materialized. The modest assistance I eventually received barely covered my medical bills, much less contributed to my family's debts. During this period, despair often kept me confined to bed, submerged in both literal and figurative darkness. Nevertheless, my parents' unwavering patience and support became my beacon. My mother spent hours narrating the world outside and exploring job possibilities that could accommodate my new reality. My father dedicated weekends to help me memorize the layout of our home, ensuring I could navigate independently. Their dedication helped me piece my life back together, teaching me to find value and purpose beyond my visual capabilities. Everything shifted last month when my older sister, Chloe, announced she was returning home for an extended stay. Having lived in Europe for the past 8 years as a successful wedding photographer, Chloe's career had flourished, capturing the pages of major magazines, a world apart from mine. We hadn't been close, separated by a decade and different life phases. She left for college when I was still very young, and our interactions dwindled over the years to occasional lavish gifts on my birthdays, with minimal personal contact. Her impending visit stirred a mix of anticipation and uncertainty, reopening chapters of our relationship that had long seemed closed. The interactions we had were shallow, just basic chit-chat about school and the weather, the sort of conversation you might expect from distant relatives rather than sisters. When I needed surgery, complications ensued, and during my recovery, I had to learn to use a screen reader. It was during this challenging time that I received an email from my sister, Chloe. My mom read it to me. It was a short message expressing sympathy, but lacked any personal touch. It felt more like a polite note you'd send to someone you barely knew, not to a sibling. Chloe didn't follow up after that, nor did she call to check on me. For months, I clung to the hope that she would reach out, but all I learned about her life came secondhand from our parents, discussing her latest ventures in the art world. Then one day, as we sat down for breakfast, my mom excitedly shared a text from Chloe announcing her plan to visit home for 2 months with someone special she wanted us to meet. My dad immediately began organizing a welcome party, while my mom called relatives to share the news. Amid the excitement, no one seemed to notice my withdrawal. After 8 years of minimal contact, the thought of Chloe's return filled me more with anxiety than joy. The situation took an even more distressing turn when my parents summoned me to discuss arrangements for Chloe's visit. With a seriousness that betrayed the gravity of the conversation, they revealed their plans for me to move out before she arrived. They had already looked into assisted living facilities and spoken to real estate agents about temporary rentals. They framed it as a chance for me to gain independence, but when pressed for the real reason, they admitted that Chloe's fiancé was unaware of my blindness, and Chloe wanted to keep it that way to ensure a perfect visit. This revelation was a shock. I reminded them of my current struggle with basic adaptive skills and my lack of financial independence, but they dismissed my concerns, citing their exhaustion from years of caregiving. My father even suggested that at 27, it was time for me to live on my own. It was clear Chloe had issued an ultimatum, and they had chosen her comfort over my well-being. Feeling betrayed and isolated, I reached out to every friend and relative I could think of, but nobody was prepared to take in someone with my specific needs. Most of my friends had relocated and were starting new lives elsewhere. It was then I remembered my maternal grandmother, whom I hadn't seen since childhood. My mother had severed ties with her years ago due to deep-seated differences that she seldom discussed. In my moment of need, reaching out to her felt like my last viable option. When I mentioned the idea of getting in touch with them, my mother reacted strongly. She strictly forbade any contact, labeling them as harmful individuals who would only complicate our lives further. This intense response from her only fueled my curiosity and resolve to uncover the truth behind our severed ties. Why had we completely disconnected from them? Why did the mere thought of reconnecting send my mother into a state of near panic? These questions led me to suspect that there were hidden family secrets that I was unaware of, especially considering the noticeable estrangement of my cousin Chloe from our family gatherings. Now, I find myself at a crossroads. My parents have given me an ultimatum: find a new place to live within 2 weeks. They claim this is for my benefit, to foster independence, but I can't help feeling rejected, as though I'm being pushed out because I no longer align with the ideal family image my sister seeks to maintain. The prospect of reaching out to my grandparents is both daunting and seemingly essential. They might be my only option for support, but I fear that contacting them might unearth unresolved issues that I do not fully understand. I am contemplating defying my mother's wishes by reaching out to my grandparents. Should I adhere to the long-standing family boundaries, or should I contend for my right to remain at home? I am overwhelmed with a sense of abandonment by those I trusted the most. The discussions here have prompted me to see things I previously overlooked, like Chloe's consistent discomfort around me or the total absence of talk about my mother's side of the family. Some of you suggested that there might be a significant family secret, and I'm starting to think you could be right. Given my mother's extreme reaction to the idea of contacting my grandparents, it seems there's more to the story than a simple family disagreement. I've decided to find my grandparents, inspired by the suggestions and help from 10 people here. I've started following some leads. What do I have to lose? My parents are pushing me out regardless, and I need a place to go. Even if my grandparents are as problematic as my mom claims, discovering the truth will provide some closure. I realized I had nothing to lose by attempting to connect with my grandparents. It felt like my last chance at securing not just a physical safe haven, but an emotional one too. I began by reaching out to any relative on my mother's side, seeking any connection. In search of a way to reconnect with my family, I turned to LinkedIn, where I stumbled upon a profile that appeared to be a distant relative, possibly a cousin of my grandmother. The thought of reaching out was daunting, and I spent hours crafting the perfect message. Finally, I decided on a simple approach, explaining that I was trying to get in touch with my grandparents because it was crucial. Initially, my distant relative hesitated, questioning why I needed the contact details and seeming wary of getting involved. However, after some persistent conversation and earnest pleas from my side, they provided me with my grandmother's phone number. Filled with nerves, I postponed a call for 2 days, wrestling with doubts about whether reaching out was the right decision. When I finally mustered the courage to dial her number, my heart pounded in my chest. I carefully entered the digits using a speech-to-text app and waited anxiously for her to answer. When my grandmother answered the call, I introduced myself, mentioning my mother and pausing as silence enveloped the line. Eventually, she responded with a tone of surprise and caution. She confessed she had never expected to hear from me and inquired about how I found her. I briefly explained my journey to get her contact and my reasons for calling. She seemed touched by my effort to reach out, which encouraged me to share more about my current hardships, a recent unsuccessful surgery, my parents' decision to ask me to leave, and my feeling of isolation. As I spoke, her voice softened, though a trace of hesitancy lingered. She expressed sorrow for my struggles and the harshness of being ousted during a low period. However, her next words were unexpected. She mentioned Chloe visiting after many years, which confused me. Upon my inquiry, she hesitated, carefully choosing her next words. She then shared that there had been minimal contact due to a long-standing family rift rooted in a grievous incident involving my mother. My grandmother revealed that years back, my mother had led an investment fraud that devastated many family members, including my grandparents. They had invested their retirement savings in what turned out to be a scam, orchestrated by my mother, who later denied responsibility despite clear evidence of her receiving benefits from the fraudulent scheme. This revelation explained why Chloe had distanced herself from our family, especially as our mother showed no remorse and made no attempts to reconcile. This disclosure shook me profoundly, unveiling a hidden chapter of family history and the deep-seated reasons behind our estranged relations. What does my being kicked out have to do with anything? I asked, my voice shaking with uncertainty. There was a pause before she replied, the hesitation in her voice clear. I believe your parents, especially your mother, are trying to maintain peace now that Chloe is returning home after many years. They've spent a long time trying to repair their relationship with her, and I hate to say it, but they might view you as a complication. She continued, Chloe has probably discussed our family's history with her fiancé, but your situation, being blind and requiring ongoing care, might lead to uncomfortable questions. Questions about the family finances and why there isn't enough support available for you. All my life, I had sensed that something wasn't quite right, like there were missing pieces in the family story. Now, things were beginning to make sense. The mysteries surrounding my mother's family, her emotional distance, and my parents' attempts to keep me out of sight. My grandmother reassured me, saying, no matter what has happened, your grandfather and I never blamed you. We've wanted to reach out for years, but your mother threatened legal action if we contacted you. Surprising me further, she added, you're innocent in all of this. You're our grandchild, and we want to help if you let us. Her words moved me deeply, and tears welled up as I expressed how much her support meant to me, especially after feeling isolated and misunderstood for so long. Then she offered something that changed everything. "You can stay with us. We have plenty of room, and we can arrange the necessary support for your needs. You won't have to feel alone anymore." I was astounded. After feeling like an unwanted burden, here was my grandmother, extending a lifeline. I accepted her offer gratefully, asking for a little time to sort things out. Now, I'm preparing to move. My grandmother has promised to help me settle in and support my journey towards independent living. As for my parents, I haven't confronted them yet, but I plan to do so right before I leave. The thought of facing my mother, after uncovering the truth, fills me with dread. I finally confronted my parents and moved out. When my grandparents arrived to help me pack, my mother was visibly upset, her face draining of color as if she'd seen a ghost. She protested their presence, but I calmly explained they were there for me. "What have you done?" she shrieked. "You were never supposed to contact them again. Why would you go behind my back?" I asked my parents to sit. Though I couldn't see them, the tension was palpable. My mother's bracelets clinked nervously, a sound I knew all too well, while my father remained silent, a sign he knew they were in the wrong. "I know everything," I said quietly, "about the investment schemes, how you misused our family funds, and the real reasons behind Chloe's departure." The room fell silent. My mother tried to deflect, portraying herself as a victim, just as my grandmother had warned. But I was ready, having recorded our conversation on my phone and spoken to other relatives who confirmed the family's losses and the kickbacks my parents received. My father tried to intervene, insisting they had changed. But I interrupted him. "Changed? You're trying to hide me away because you're afraid Chloe's fiancé will ask questions about your finances. You're willing to discard your own daughter to avoid facing the consequences of your actions." My mother's tone then shifted from defensive to pleading, but I stood firm, ready to start a new chapter with the support of my grandparents. For 5 months, she had been telling me how much they had done for me, how much they had spent on my medical bills, my equipment, and everything else I needed. "How can you be so ungrateful?" she asked. My grandmother, who had been listening in silence until then, finally spoke up. "Those medical bills wouldn't have been necessary if you hadn't insisted on that surgery right after her graduation. Did you convince her to use her savings for it, just like you convinced us to invest in your failed business venture?" At this, my mother lost her temper. She began yelling, claiming they had no right to be in her house, accusing them of trying to take her daughter away, just like they took Chloe. Despite her angry words, she never refuted any of the accusations. My mother, her voice now quieter but laced with bitterness, finally admitted, "We pushed for the surgery because we thought it would help her career. How could we have known it would end up like this?" As the argument continued, I couldn't help but speak up. "And now that things have gone wrong, now that I'm not the perfect daughter you can show off, you want to hide me away. Just like you've hidden away everything you've done to our family." That's when my father finally joined the conversation. He acknowledged their mistakes, claiming they were only trying to protect me. "Protect me from what?" I demanded. "From knowing the truth about my own family? From connecting with my grandparents, who genuinely want to help." He explained that they wanted to reconcile with my cousin Chloe, whose fiancé came from a well-known family. They worried that having a disabled daughter who needed financial support would raise too many difficult questions. "So you decided to push me aside," I concluded, feeling a mix of hurt and clarity. As they tried to justify their actions, their true intentions became painfully obvious. They saw me not as their daughter, but as a problem that needed to be managed. When they couldn't deny the truth any longer, they resorted to threats. My mother started talking about taking legal action, warning me that trusting my grandparents was a mistake. Meanwhile, my grandfather quietly finished loading my belongings into their car. He reassured me with a firm hand on my shoulder. "We've spoken to our lawyer, and everything's been documented. Your parents' demands for you to leave, their refusal to continue supporting you. If anyone should be worried about legal consequences, it's not us." Over the past few days, while my parents were at work, I had already packed most of my important documents and belongings. My grandparents helped me collect the rest, my adaptive equipment, my clothes, and a few cherished mementos. My mother oscillated between threats and tears, while my father stood silently. As we were about to leave, my mother tried one last time to stop me. "If you leave with them, don't expect to ever come back. You're choosing them over your own parents." I turned to her, and even though I couldn't see her face, I wanted her to hear my reply clearly.
"No, Mom.
You chose Chloe's convenience over me. You chose to keep your secrets over maintaining a relationship with your own parents. You've always put yourself first. I'm just choosing myself for the first time." The drive to my grandparents' house was filled with a profound, resonant silence. Despite the turmoil of losing my sight, a calmness enveloped me, marking the first time I truly felt peace since the onset of my blindness. It was as though I could perceive the world more clearly than ever before. My grandparents, who have been pillars of strength, stepped in to support my journey toward adaptation. They arranged for an CCF to guide me and made our home more accessible to accommodate my needs. My grandfather dove into researching technologies like text-to-speech software, always eager to find tools that could aid me further. Each evening, my grandmother would spend time with me, weaving the stories of our ancestors, filling the gaps in our family history that I had missed. This connection to my past became a comforting ritual. Meanwhile, Chloe, after learning that I was staying with our grandparents, sent me an email apologizing for her role in our parents' harsh decision to send me away. She confessed that the pressure she put on our parents was due to her inability to witness how poorly they treated me, memories that echoed a betrayal from long ago in our family's history. She vowed to visit me once her initial stay with our parents concluded, hinting at a possible reconciliation. Amidst this, my parents oscillated between remorse and blame through numerous calls and messages. Choosing to maintain my peace, I blocked them, opting to communicate only through my grandparents' lawyer to safeguard my rights and manage my assets. Ironically, the loss of my sight unveiled the stark realities of my familial relationships. While I am still mastering the nuances of living with blindness and unpacking my family's complex history, I find solace in the genuine support from those who truly care. This new chapter, supported by my grandparents and those who encouraged me to reconnect with them, has not only provided me with a sanctuary, but also unveiled the obscured truths of my life. It is a poignant reminder that sometimes, the family that stands by you in your darkest hours is the family you truly need, not necessarily the one into which you were born.